Welcome to You Should Know, a series about the things you should have been taught in high school, but weren't. In each episode, we'll dive into a topic that's important to understand and easy to implement into your life. We'll talk to experts, break down complex ideas, and give you the information that you need to make informed decisions. So whether you're looking to learn something new or just want to stay up to date on the latest news, You Should Know is the place for you. So give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and let's get started. I'm Danae Hicks with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. I am the Ellis County Family Community Health Agent. I invited our guest on today to talk about some misconceptions about meat from the grocery store, but I'm going to let him introduce himself before we hop into questions.
Oh, howdy. I'm Dr. Davey Griffin. I'm an extension meat specialist. So I work along in the meat industry or with the meat industry, but help any way I can with county agents, with anything kind of doing, having to do with the meat industry or meat animal products and those kind of things. And I've been here on faculty at Texas A&M AgriLife for about 35 years now.
Awesome. Okay, so we're just going to jump in. And I know one of the big questions that consumers have is why some cuts of meat are more tender than others.
Yeah, and that's a really great question, and one that over time we've tried to answer in a lot of different ways. It goes back to even people talking about eating high on the hog, and those cuts that were from up on the back part of the hog were some of the most tender ones. Well, the reason being is they're not used as much in locomotion and those kind of things. And so forever we kind of went along that way and said, that's pretty much what cuts, and we did some really basic cuts that we used a lot. What we figured out over time, though, is it's a muscle to muscle difference in tenderness. And so we've found out that maybe even like in beef, the second most tender muscle in the whole carcass is really up in the chuck in the shoulder area that we used to not even think about. It was always in a 7-bone pot roast or something like that. Instead, we could take those muscles out now and use them by themselves. If you've heard of a flat iron steak, that's one that came from the point of the shoulder, and it is the second most tender muscle in the whole carcass. So we've started identifying, I guess, a lot of those independent muscles to be able to determine their tenderness and maybe be able to use some of those for steak cuts and things like that we used to not be able to do at all.
Yeah.
So that's kind of part of it. Part of it's how they're used. The other part, Danae, that's a little different is that some of that tenderness is not innate to the muscle. It's how we harvest the animal. And so the tenderloin and even that flat iron that I just mentioned are some that they actually get some of their tenderness from the way we hang the carcass on the rail.
Okay.
The tenderloin actually hooks into the femur, and as we hang the carcass up, that stretches those muscles, those fibers of those muscles. So we're eating through this and not through this. And so some of it's mechanical, some of it's the way the animals use their muscles and those kind of things as well. So that's why some of them from the chuck, some of them from the round are going to be tougher just because they're used more, honestly.
Yeah, that's great. I am learning a ton already, so this is awesome. Why? We've already talked about why some of them are more tender than others. Does the cooking method that you utilize affect that at all?
Well, and absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned that, or I'm glad you asked that. Not only cooking method, but what temperature we cook products to. In the past, especially something like pork, we were always taught, our parents were taught, that you had to really cook pork well done,
Oh yeah.
because if we don't, then there's a problem with, a parasite or something like that, that we don't have those kind of problems much anymore. And we figured out that honestly, we were overcooking anyway, or to kill those. So like pork, everybody thinks you've got to really cook it to a really high degree of doneness. But if you're talking about solid muscle cuts, cooking those to 145 degrees and letting it rest for about 3 minutes really makes pork outstanding, instead of just cooking it until, I always say, till it gives up. It really finally ends up giving up there. Obviously, cooking method also then becomes real important in there, because when you cook, uh, if we cooked a brisket out on the grill, you know, uh, we're gonna really have to be chewing real hard to get through
Uh,
some of those things. But if we take that same brisket and we cook it low, slow, moist heat cookery, those kind of things over a number of hours, where we can break down those muscles that are used more, have more connective tissue associated with the muscles just because they are used more, then we end up with a lot more tender cut and things. So yeah, cooking method is really important. You use a crock pot to, over time, to be able to break some of those things down. There's other cuts that, gosh, we can take out on the grill and use at a really high temperature underneath them, and they come out really wonderful and really tender. So it does matter what kind of cut you've got in relation to how you're going to cook it. So both, I think, come into play there a whole lot.
yeah. So we've talked beef just a tiny bit. You mentioned it when I asked the first question. As consumers go through the supermarket, the grocery store, they may see labels like prime or select or choice. What do those actually mean?
Well, that's a great question too, and the way that the industry is set up, and most species, not just beef, but we'll use them as the example, because I think that it's probably more defined that way and defined in the stores that way and things. But every USDA has grades for all the commodities, all the beef products and things. I guess I ought to back up just a little bit. There's two parts of USDA that we have involved in our industry a lot. One is Food Safety Inspection Service. If something's going into commerce, if it's to be sold, everything is required to be inspected. So for food safety. So everything is involved in food safety from those standpoints. You can be assured that the products, if they're being sold in a store, even at a farmer's market or anything like that, those have to be inspected for safety and wholesomeness. So that's one part of USDA, and everybody gets these confused. The other part is the grading portion of that. And so the grading portion's voluntary. So it doesn't have to actually be graded. A packer, it's to their benefit to have them graded, in that those that are higher grading obviously are worth more, the value goes up, those kind of things, compared to something that's lower. But when we talk about grading is really taking this whole heterogeneous population and dividing those into groups that our data shows will, the prediction of eating quality will be better or worse according to where we are in grades. So if we're grading beef, for example, those cattle are going to come out of the cooler and, well, into a different part of the cooler, but they're going to chill for 24 to 48 hours. They're going to rib those carcasses, which just means cut between the muscles, or between some of the bones and muscles. They're about the 12th and 13th rib in the carcass, and they expose a surface And then the USDA grader is in the plant as an autonomous, independent person. The plant can't tell them what to grade the carcasses or how to grade the carcasses. They just ask them to either grade them or not grade them. But what the grader then's looking for is a couple of things. They balance maturity of what they see there as a carcass, and in terms of how old they are. And so we look at bone structure, we look at lean color. There's a number of different things that go into that. But fortunately, with the fed cattle supply in the United States, most of those cattle are somewhere between 9 and 30 months of age. So we know just about how old they are, at least in that young period of time there. We balance that with looking at in the case of beef, the ribeye muscle there, and seeing those little specks of fat that are inside the muscle, not how much is on the outside, not how much is between the muscles, but the little flakes of fat that are actually inside the muscle themselves. And so we use that as a predictor for tenderness. So prime's going to have somewhere around 7 to 10% inside that muscle as fat that's going to be deposited there. And cattle do that if they're on a high plane of nutrition. If they've got about a half an inch of fat over the outside of them, we know that if they've got the genetics to deposit marbling in their intramuscular fat, then it ought to be in there by then. So that's what a feedlot's looking at as they look at the animals. Then as we grade those are going to have more, and they're going to have, and we hope that they'll have those little specks of fat, little flakes of fat, kind of like snowfall in there, because we know that those do better than the big chunks of fat that are in there. But we're really looking at the amount. And so prime's going to have more than choice. Choice is going to have more than select. We also today have a bunch of branded products out there. So certified Angus beef, for example, said we have this whole group of cattle, and today it's above 70% that grade choice, but there's different levels of marbling in the choice grade. So they said, we're going to take kind of the upper end of that and make a brand that is, even though it's graded choice, we're going to take kind of the cream of the choice and make a brand, and we call it certified Angus beef. So that's why you see a lot of branded beef products out there on the market today, and it's all done by grade, by quality grade.
I am learning so much. So the marbling comes from genetics and what they're being fed, but if they don't have the genetics for it, no matter how much you feed them, they won't ever marble out to like.
They can. I have photos of cattle that have over an inch of fat over the outside and almost no marbling inside. So yeah, it's not something that it just happens according to how much they've been fed. We do know that if they're not on a high plane of nutrition, if they don't have enough calories going in, then they won't put it on, even if they have the genetics to do so. But if they don't have the genetics, then it just will never happen. That's why certified Angus beef has been, or the Angus breed has done a really great job. We know that Angus cattle have a higher genetic propensity to put on marbling or put in marbling. And so that's why there's so many of the cattle today, over 2/3 of the cattle that are in the U.S. herd are black. And so they have some amount of Angus genetics associated with those cattle. And it's an attempt to put in marbling because that enhances value.
Yeah. So I've got another labeling question for you.
Sure.
So consumer sees grass-fed beef on a label. Is that going to affect the meat?
The short answer is yes. And I don't want to, and here's my whole take on this. if somebody believes that grass-fed is better for them, then I want them to eat grass-fed beef. I'm good with I want them to eat meat and meat products and feel like that's part of a healthy diet and the whole bit. There are some challenges with grass-fed that you don't have with grain-fed. Those grain-fed cattle go into a feedlot at weighing about 700 to 800 pounds. They're in there for about 150 to 200 days. While they're there, I always say it's kind of like our Olympic athletes. They have a nutritionist, they have a veterinarian, they have people checking on them every day. They're everything's prescribed for those cattle to gain as efficiently as they can. And so they become more uniform in flavor and how they're putting on fat and all those kind of things, and a little more predictable. When we start talking about grass fed, grass in Texas changes during the year
Sure
a
does.
lot, and sometimes we don't have any. But if you're going to use the claim as grass fed, then you can't supplement that with a lot of grain. And so it's more variable in maybe eating quality. It's maybe a little more variable, and they're not going to gain as fast because they're not always on as high plane of nutrition. Even if they have really good grass, those cattle are going to take longer to get to harvest weight. There's just no way around it. And so to do that, then and because if you look at them, if you see those cattle in the cooler, most of the time they're going to have kind of a, I hate to say, yellowish kind of tinge to the fat. And that's because the grass is supplying something, the beta carotene,
Mhm.
that's coming in the grass. And so that is in the fat. Even cattle come in that go into the feedlot, when they weigh 700 or 800 pounds, their fat's more yellowish. Takes about 100 days of feeding really good corn and on a concentrated diet for that fat to kind of turn to the white color that we're used to seeing. So will there be some flavor differences? Yeah. Sometimes especially if those cattle have taken longer, they've been on some of these, like here in Texas, where we don't have as high a plane of nutrition in the grass sometimes, those kind of things. It's going to be more, I don't know how earthy, a little bit more intense in flavor, which a lot of people prefer. And if they do, that's wonderful. If you don't, then maybe grass fed's not for you. But you just have to try it and know that there's going to be a little more variability in it.
Yeah. All right. So this is one that I have heard plenty about, so I would love to get your take on it. What is the red juice or blood on
Oh,
the
I love
tray
that.
in the store?
And I love talking to students and whoever I can about this, because here's the deal. When we harvest those animals at our meat lab here on campus or at any major plant, first off, the inspection group that's there makes sure that that's done humanely, with a lot of respect for the animals, and in a way that they do not feel pain. But when we make those animals unconscious, we want to keep the heart pumping, because as we cut the veins, we remove the blood, we want absolutely as much of that as possible out of the animal and out of the carcass. And so, what people really see when they see that red in the package at the store, or they cook it to a medium rare and they see that come out on the plate, is something called myoglobin. And myoglobin is a pigment that is in the muscle cells itself. And it does appear red when you look at it, because it's almost like if you look at blood vessels in your arm, they're kind of purplish. So that blood is purple there until you expose it to oxygen. Well, myoglobin is close to hemoglobin in structure and those kind of things. And so it essentially does the same thing. And that's why we see the red color, the bright cherry red color in meat. But that is truly a pigment called myoglobin and not blood. And so I always enjoy talking about that some and helping people understand that what they're seeing is not what they think they're seeing. Because if it were, the plant was not doing a very good job back there, and that's just not the way it works. So
Yeah.
it is myoglobin. It is a protein. It is okay to consume. People just go freak out because they see that red color. I would never eat that. It's just bloody and things. Well, it's really not blood, but it's hard to convince folks of that.
Yeah. So while we're talking about red juices and myoglobin and all that fun stuff, how do grocery stores keep meat looking fresh?
That's another one of those good questions, and it's something that people don't understand. There's nothing on that meat. There is not one single thing that is allowed to be put onto that meat to keep it red. Now, I won't say that in 100 years ago that there weren't some things that happened, but I can tell you today that really the way most of the grocery stores do that is it's just not out there very long. If you really notice at any of the major grocery stores today, there's not just that this was fresh ground or whatever. There is actually a date and time put on there. And part of that's for food safety, but part of it's because they have a pretty good idea of how long that product will stay red. If it doesn't, they have to put it in those bins that are reduced for quick sale and all those kind of things. So those guys do a lot of work to be sure that that product is not out there very long. And so it's only there. And it's according to what it is too. Solid muscle cuts, steak cuts, they'll last 2 or 3 days out in the case without having that muscle color is not going to turn real quickly. And all it really is doing, that's a whole the chemistry of muscle is really a phenomenon that happens all the time, where that muscle is going from purple, just like it would be if you look at something that's in a store and it's vacuum packaged. It usually has this purplish red color to through a brown to that bright cherry red, and that triangle just continues to happen all the time. And one in whatever state that muscle's in, the most is the one that we see that we win by. So when we reduce that oxygen completely, we get purplish color like vacuum packaged. When it's kind of in a state where it has some oxygen but not a lot of oxygen, it'll kind of turn brown. So over time, it will turn to that brown color as the muscle runs out of energy to keep that reaction going. So that's really what it's about. It's really going to be red because it is red and not because they put anything on there. There's nothing that USDA will allow to happen there. Now, they obviously, lighting makes a difference, and they'll use the lights that make it look as red as they can and those kind of things. But the muscle itself, you can be assured, has nothing on it.
I think that's great for consumers to hear, because there are lots of stuff that you can find on the internet that says otherwise, that don't have the USDA backing it up.
Yeah, there is so much, and I want to be sure everybody understands that, because it really is. There is really nothing they can put on that in the store, and it's still now, as those muscles start to um, run out of energy and they start to turn brown, you know, the store can take those and they can season, do things like that, but they can't put something on there to deceive the public and make it appear to be bright cherry red. That just we can't
Yeah.
allow that. Yeah.
Okay, so while we're on the topic of meat, since it's a great topic and that's what we're hitting on today, what if a label doesn't say antibiotic free and hormone free? Does that mean that those have antibiotics and hormones in them?
Yeah. Well, they all have hormones in there. I don't care what anybody says, hormone free, anything else. There are hormones in all products because we're human and that's muscle. But having more or less is kind of the issue there. And I always think about this. Yes, we do use in a lot of the feedlot cattle. If it claims to have, if it never been given any additional hormones or those kind of things, then that is a claim that USDA makes sure that they follow. But the difference in that and what we would call kind of commodity beef is they use a little actually estrogen, or most of the times it's one of the compounds that we already have in our body, or there's a couple of synthetics, but they put that little thing in their ear and it helps that animal create or transform the energy that it's taken into muscle more than fat. And so they grow more and they grow faster. The difference in the amount of hormones that would be there is in a few nanograms. And when we talk about nanograms, we're talking about an extremely small number. One of the examples we've used is here at the football field. If you look at that whole field of grass, the difference between an animal that has had that in his ear, and we don't eat the ears, so we never have any of that in the food chain, but the difference in the amount of hormones that's there because of that is about 3 blades of grass out of that whole field. So is there a little added? Yes. Could you ever quantify that? Really not. And so it's really hard to hear that sometimes. And people, I'm fine with companies that have claims that say we don't use that, and it does. Sometimes the cattle will grade maybe a little higher or something like that from that. That's fine, but they're not. It's hard to say that because that same compound is in the muscle, in all muscle anyway. It's just we haven't used that to help with growth hormone.
Okay, so we're not like lining the cows up and shooting them with steroids and antibiotics just for the fun of it.
No. And the antibiotic part of it, USDA is really, really involved in being sure that those animals, I mean, we use antibiotics in the meat animal industry. Mainly we use meat animal or antibiotics. Those cattle, those pen riders ride those pens every day. They find cattle that have a cold, that have some issue that requires them to give them an antibiotic. Well, all of that's done at a hospital there at the feedlot. Those animals are identified as being given those antibiotics, and they are prescribed withdrawal periods that those animals then have to go through before they can be harvested. And USDA tests all the time to see if we've got antibiotic levels that are too high, or that we're seeing antibiotics that shouldn't be in there, and they're just not. And those guys know. I mean, that's their business to know, and they've got veterinarians there to be sure that it's not done.
Yeah, well, that's reassuring for
Yeah.
sure for the consumers. I got 2 more questions for you.
Sure.
What you've talked expiration dates a little bit already. There are some things floating around online that say expiration dates for meats are meaningless.
You know, I'm going to tell you that I don't pay a lot of attention to them because most of what's there is that is a company's research that says this will be best if used by X. They don't have something that says at this date, this is now toxic to you or anything like that. So I don't, I say use your own judgment on that. If the package says used by, then it's going to be the thing that usually those indicate is that for best quality may be used by the date that's on there. But if the product has been kept cold, and I mean cold, like, okay, the if you've got that in an ice chest somewhere where the temperature is going up and down, that's one thing. If you've got it in a refrigerator, or in our case here where we've got a walk-in cooler where the temperature stays really constant, then a day or two or whatever past that date that's on there, usually I just look at it and use is it sticky? Does it smell? All those kind of things to tell me more than the date that's on there, honestly.
Yeah. No, that's good to know for sure. All right. One last question. And this one is just from your point of view, what's one takeaway that you hope that the viewers understand after listening to this?
Well, I think, it's kind of a combination, but it's one of those where I hope that they understand that we have a system in place to make sure that we have the safest, most wholesome meat supply in the world. And within that, then you've got opportunities for some really high quality products, and that they understand a little bit about how, if you don't want to use those really high quality steaks or those kind of things, you can still get a great eating experience with some of the other cuts or the ground cuts and those kind of things. Just be sure that when you do some of those, that you have the right cooking method and you cook them to the right degree of doneness or temperature. And I'm a big thermometer geek. So to me, using a thermometer and knowing that you've got to be more careful with ground than you've got solid muscle cuts, all those kind of things, will be sure that you have a good, overall experience with meat products.
All right. Hey, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to come chat with us.
Oh my
I
God.
learned a lot. I have a little background in it. I still learned a lot. So thank you so much for stopping by.
Oh, good night. I'm just glad to be here. And anytime I can help, please let me know.
This has been You Should Know. Don't forget to leave us a thumbs up and a comment about what you learned today. We're so glad you stopped by. And as always, if you'd like to reach out to us, email us at youshouldknowwithdanae@gmail.com. We'll see you next time.